would you say that you are the type of person that likes to try or start new things? Now, I'm not referring to work-related things because many times you don't have a choice with that, right? You just got to go into it. But things like, for instance, when was the last time that you picked up a new hobby? Maybe pickleball, anyone? No? Knitting? No? Or when was the last time you tried to learn a new language? Or you took dance lessons? Here, I really want you to raise your hand with this one. Did anyone try or start something new in 2023? Just last year. Okay. Oh, more than 9 o'clock. All right, good. That's good. All right, here's a question for you guys. Of those things that you tried for the first time or started, this is a more important question. When you realized that you weren't as good at that thing that you hoped to be, did you keep at it? Did you push through even when you couldn't catch the learning curve? That's a more important question. You see, because if you're anything like me, or like most of humanity, we tend to give up on things when we're not making progress, right? If you're anything like me, man, we won't even start or try something new unless we know for a fact that we're going to be at least decent at it once we step into it, right? Or so for some of us, the bar's a little higher. We want to be above average. And if we're not going to hit that bar, we won't even go for it. That's not for me. You can do it. That's not for me. Carol Dweck writes about this in her book, Mindset. This is a book that came out several years ago. Some of you have read it or you're familiar with the concept. This is where she's talking about the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset, right? And one of the things that stuck out to me about people with a fixed mindset, she says this, when we have a fixed mindset towards something, right? When we have a fixed mindset toward a task or a skill that we want to learn and grow in, when we have a fixed mindset, we tend to avoid challenges. And when those challenges come up, we tend to give up early. Because here's the thing, we see effort as fruitless or worse. We don't think our effort will make a difference if we lean into it. We're not going to learn the thing. Now, you might be asking, why are you bringing this up? Why am I bringing this up in our series, We Want You Here? Well, here's why. Because today we're going to talk about prayer. And I don't know of a habit or a practice where more people lean into a fixed mindset than this one. Prayer has a way of making most of us, if not all of us, feel like we have no idea what we're doing. And for many of us, we don't think it's worth figuring out and pushing through. And so we give up. But what you need to understand is that there is something inherent in prayer that causes us to feel this way. And many of us feel that way regardless of how long we've been Christians. Thomas Merton, he was a Catholic monk and he was a theologian. He wrote this. He wrote, "We do not want to be beginners at prayer, but let us be convinced of the fact that we will never be anything but beginners all our life." Oh, I don't know about you, but I love that quote. I love that quote, you see, because that quote gives me much comfort and reassurance, right? He's affirming something that I feel deeply, and you know what he's saying? It's okay. It's okay for you to feel like a beginner when it comes to prayer. It's okay. And let me take it a step further. Church, let us be okay with being perpetual beginners at prayer, but let us not be okay with being non-starters. Let's not be okay with that, right? Or let's not be okay with starting and then giving up and not picking it back up. Because guess what? We're going to drop it every once in a while. It's going to happen. But let's just pick it back up. Why? Well, to build on what Pastor Ben taught last week, which, by the way, if you missed it, you got to go back and listen. He taught on the presence of God. And so for us, if we want the presence of God in our lives, which is the greatest distinction that we can have, and if we want the presence of God in our church and in our family and in our work and in every sphere that we inhabit, there's no way for that to be possible unless we become a praying people. There's no way. There's no possible way for us to get the presence of God, for us to receive the presence of God, unless we become a praying people. The reason Moses, which is the text that Pastor Ben preached from last week, in Exodus. The reason Moses was able to have the presence of God go with him and with the people was why? Because he asked for it in prayer. It was because he was in regular communion with God. And God was pleased with him. And God says, I'm going to give you what you're asking for. And so in our passage for today, Jesus is inviting us into a relationship with God, with the Father, that it can be developed and nourished through prayer. That's what he's telling us. He's inviting us into a relationship that can be developed and nourished through prayer. And so we're going to be reading out of Matthew 6. And Matthew 6 is a part of the Sermon on the Mount. The sermon is found in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And we're going to read a part of the sermon where Jesus is addressing specifically prayer. And Jesus, in these passages, he tells us two things that we need to avoid when it comes to prayer. And then he gives us some alternative options in response to those things that he wants us to avoid. And so what we're going to do, it's a fairly long passage, but we're going to just read one verse at this time. And then it's the first thing that he tells us to avoid, and then we'll go on to the rest. You guys game? You're with me? Okay. Why don't we stand and read this first verse, Matthew chapter 6, verse 5. And it's also going to be on the screen. It says this, and when you pray, right, there's an expectation that we will pray as his followers. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites. We don't want to be like those hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. Church, go ahead and have a seat. I pray that God's word will speak to us. The first thing that Jesus tells us to avoid is to avoid praying in public to be seen by others. Now, any street preachers here that have an issue with this? You have your bullhorn in your bag? No? All right. No, I figured that wasn't going to be the case. This is not something that most of us struggle with, right? But it definitely was an issue in Jesus' day and in his context, right? You see, because during that time, the Jews prayed 3 hours a day, or 3 moments, 3 times a day. At the same time, they would go and pray, right? And so there was a morning hour, there was a midday hour, and an evening hour. And what would happen is, as they were going about their day, when that hour came, whatever they were doing, they would stop what they were doing, and they would pray right where they were. But here's the issue. Some were strategic with where they were when they prayed, right? They would make sure that they were in the right place, around the right people, and they would pray loud enough to be seen and heard by others. It was all a show. It was all a performance. And this is why Jesus calls them hypocrites, which is a word we still use today, right? The word hypocrite during that time was referencing a Greek actor that would get on stage and put on masks in order to play different roles. So Jesus is calling out those who put on a mask in order to look good, those who perform a religious activity so that they may be applauded by others. He's calling out those who put on a mask in order to look good on the outside but cover up the messiness on the inside. And in Matthew 6, not only does he call those people out as hypocrites, before and after our passage, he also calls out those who make a big deal when they give to the needy. He calls them hypocrites as well. And he gives the example that these are people who blow a trumpet before they give a big gift. Can you imagine that? That during our offering, someone tells their friend, go ahead, blow the trumpet. And as the bucket passes, like, here it is. Now, it seems ridiculous, but I'm sure they were more subtle than that, even though they're blowing trumpets, because they were receiving something out of it. They were receiving applause. They were receiving approval. So he calls out those who pray in public to be seen. He calls out those who make a big deal of giving to the needy. He also calls out those who make a big deal of their fasting. Those who show with how messed up they look that they are suffering for the Lord. Look how I'm sacrificing for God. They wanted that applause, that approval. He's calling out anyone who performs spiritual practices in order to draw attention to themselves. He's calling out those who do the right things for the wrong reasons. That's the definition of a hypocrite. Now, keep in mind that Jesus is not saying that all public religious expression is wrong. If he were saying that, I would be in trouble. A lot of us would be in trouble, right? And keep in mind, too, that Jesus prayed in public. So that's not the point here. And if you go even further, actually, the chapter before, it's still the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew 5:16, Jesus tells us the opposite, to do the opposite of what he's telling us to do with what we just read. Matthew 5:16, he says in that verse, "Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds." Oh, it's wrong for me for people to see my good deeds in one instance, but here he's saying, no, let your light shine before others that they may see your good deeds. But it doesn't end there. That they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Do you see the difference? In one instance, you let yourself be seen because it brings glory to the Father. But in another instance, you are only letting yourself be seen because it brings glory to you. And Jesus is saying that's what you need to stay away from. In a nutshell, he's saying something that we all know, and it's this: motives matter. Motives matter. Why you do what you do matters. Matters. Now, I know that our motives are a mixed bag, that they're not always good. And what Jesus is saying is that your motives can't be purified in public. So he gives us an alternative. And this is the alternative in verse 6. He says, "But when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites who love to be seen by others. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." That's the hour of prayer. Go in public, go in private, go into the secret place. Listen, in the secret place, there is no way for you to make your name great. But let me tell you, in the secret place, he can become great in you. He can do something in you that will change you and transform you. He can become great in you. You know, Jesus says that those who pray in public, those who do good deeds in public, they have already received their reward, right? He talks about this reward throughout these passages. They have already received their reward, which is, for those who do it in public, it's to be seen. That's all you're going to get out of it. It's a little bit of applause. But he says there's something special reserved. There's a different type of reward for those who meet with him in the secret place. What is that reward? Anybody like a reward, by the way? Oh, we all like rewards. We all like that bonus time, right? Right? We want a reward. Jesus is saying, oh, there's a reward for you. Meet with me in the secret place. What is that reward? Well, first of all, Jesus is not saying that you're going to get whatever you want, right? He's not saying that if you meet with him, you're definitely going to get that house or the car or the job or the spouse. No. It's not a physical reward. What's the reward then? By the way, he does want you to ask for those things, but it's not like a formula. It's not that. What's the reward? The reward is him. It's him. It's intimacy with him. The reward is exactly what Pastor Ben was talking about last week. The reward is the presence of God in us and among us. And I'm telling you, you're like, oh, that's it. No, that is it. That is worth you seeking him and pursuing him for. That is the game changer. That is the difference maker, is having him in your life and wherever you go. So listen, what if Contemplate this with me. What if God's presence during our Sunday gatherings was determined by whether or not the majority of us spent time alone with him this week? What if? Listen, we believe there's a direct correlation between those two things. There really is. In fact, this past Friday, I was meeting with my son in the morning, which we do from time to time for like a Bible study. And one of the questions that came up was this: have you ever experienced the presence of God in worship? Have you ever experienced the presence of God in worship? And he's like, quickly, yeah. And in fact, the last time was Wednesday, because you see, Wednesday we had a night of worship and prayer right here at 7 p.m. And the next thing he said, it just blew me away. He said this: but it wasn't something I experienced for myself. He used this word. He said, it was something that I caught as I saw others worshiping and praying. And I'm like, that's it. That's what we are after. He was in an environment where people were hungry for God, where people were seeking God, where people were crying out to God and calling on him. And when he saw it, he felt the presence of God for himself. And I told the church on Wednesday, those who were here, listen, we are going to pursue God this year. We want the presence of God in this place, so much so that it's physical, it's tangible, it's evident, it's strong, that a stranger, someone who probably has never experienced God before, can walk in this place and be blown away and say, wow, God is in that place. God is with those people, and I want that. We want to create a hunger for the presence of God. And my son was able to experience that as he saw so many of you worshiping and calling out to God. And so, can we encourage you to meet with God in that secret place? And listen, not just for your sake, but for all of our sakes, to develop that secret life with him. That's the invitation. Don't pray in public or don't do good deeds in public just to be seen, just to make your name great, but let him become great in you in the secret place. The second thing Jesus tells us to avoid in prayer is this, verse 7. And when you pray, there's the expectation again. When you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Oh, a lot of you are going to like this one here. You know what Jesus is saying there? He's saying, your prayers don't have to be long. You could pray short prayers that are effective. He's saying, listen, you don't have to keep on babbling and using many words. That's not the formula. That doesn't get you access to God. Now, keep in mind that Jesus is not against long prayers. He's not against long prayers. In fact, many times Jesus would pray all night, a long prayer, spend time with the Father. But here's the principle that I want you to walk away with. Choose consistency over length. Choose consistency with God over length. It is better for you to spend 5 to 10 minutes with God daily, praying to him, seeking him, than for you to spend an hour every 2 weeks or so. It will make a greater difference in your life if you meet with God daily than if you meet with him every once in a while, whenever you find the time. That is true, I believe, in all relationships. Why wouldn't it be true in our relationship with God? And practically speaking, guys, we all know this. It is much easier to find 5 to 10 minutes than an hour at any point in our lives because we're so busy. Choose consistency over length. Now, here's another thing that I found fascinating as I was studying this passage of something that Jesus says. Jesus doesn't call those who pray long hypocrites like he did earlier. No. He chooses a different word for them. What does he call them? He calls them pagans. Pagans. Isn't that a great word? Pagan. No, I'm just messing with you. That might sound worse than what it is, but this is the definition of pagan. Pagan is a person holding religious beliefs other than those of the main or recognized religion. Someone who has different beliefs other than the ones that I hold. That's a pagan. And someone who has a different religious belief might call me a pagan because I hold a different belief than they do. what Jesus is saying here is the reason people pray like that, babbling on, using many words, is because they don't know the God that I know. They don't know the one true God. There's something that we can all know about God that will change how we approach him. And Jesus reveals that in the next verse, verse 8. Look what he says. Do not be like them. Do not be like the pagans who babble on. For your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Your Father. Jesus is like, listen, you're not approaching a random being that you need to appease or that you need to wear out with your many words. No. You are approaching your Father. Your Father, your daddy, you're approaching him. And so just go and spend time with him. And keep in mind, Jesus is very strategic. Jesus is connecting us being little children and having a father, and he's also tying into that relationship asking. Asking. Your Father knows what you need before you ask him. I believe Jesus is telling us this. He tells us this to help us get rid of any fear that we are praying wrong or that we are asking in the wrong way or that we are asking selfishly. Why? Why do I believe that? Because if you know anything about little children, kids are shameless when it comes to asking, right? Shameless. They do not hold back. Do you think a kid really contemplates how they're going to go and ask their mom or dad, whether or not they're going to come across as selfish or that they're going to get it wrong? No, they're just going to ask. They're just going to ask. I want to read you this quote from Paul Miller's book called The Praying Life. And if you are ever going to read a book on prayer, you need to read this one, okay? It is one of the best books I've ever read on prayer, and it is definitely the most practical book I've ever read on prayer. Okay, and he has a great quote on this, on how sometimes we think we're getting it wrong, and we don't want to ask because we don't want to be selfish or anything like that. Look at what he says. Children never get frozen by their selfishness. They never get frozen by their selfishness. They come just as they are, totally self-absorbed. And this is his recommendation. Become like a little child. Ask, believe, and yes, even play. How do little children ask? Without guile. They just say what is on their minds. They have no awareness of what is appropriate or inappropriate. And then I love this last line. When you and I stop trying to be an adult and stop trying to get it right, prayer will just flow. Prayer, that's what we want, right? For prayer to flow. Let's stop trying to be adults before God. Let's stop trying or let's stop worrying that whether or not we are getting it right or we're doing it wrong, but let's just remember that we have a Father in heaven who loves us and who knows exactly what we need, meaning he is intimately aware with who you are and what you need. And he just wants to spend time with you. He just wants to spend time with you. So meet him in that secret place. Now, I feel like Jesus double clicks on this idea of approaching God as Father. You see, because the next thing that Jesus does in verse 9 is that he actually gives us a model prayer. A model prayer. He gives us an example of a short but effective prayer, which, by the way, includes more than just asking. He wants us to know you can pray short, you can pray effective prayers, short effective prayers, but you need to know that your prayers should include a little bit more than just asking for things. So this is what he does in verse 9. He says, this then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Now, many of you, most of you, all of you are probably familiar with that prayer. This is what is known as the Lord's Prayer. And this is a great and beautiful prayer that we can recite even word for word from time to time. There's nothing wrong with reciting that prayer word for word. But I believe the main reason that Jesus gives us this prayer is so that we might use it as a guide. You see, this is a model prayer that has a structure. It has a structure, which allows us to take Jesus' beautiful words and the points that he's making and craft them into our own prayers with our own personality, with the things that we are personally going through in this current moment. And let me give you an example of what that looks like. Tomorrow we celebrate and honor Dr. King, right? Tomorrow is actually, I believe, his birthday on January 15th. We're going to honor, and we do this every year. It's a national holiday. And many of us know Dr. King as obviously the civil rights leader of that time. But many of us kind of forget, or we just kind of push it to the background, that Dr. King was also a pastor. He was a minister. And he had these amazing sermons and also some beautiful prayers. And the other day I came across one of his prayers, and it was just so cool for me to see the Lord's Prayer peeking through this prayer and him taking it and crafting his own words in order to connect his heart with God's heart and to connect what was happening in his time with what he wanted to see God do in that time. And so let me give you this example. Jesus taught us to pray, right? Your will be done. Your will be done. Dr. King prayed, give us the intelligence to know your will. Give us the courage to do your will. And give us the devotion to love your will. He just took your will be done and added his own words. But it's the same prayer. He used it as a model. Jesus also taught us, forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. This is what Dr. King prayed in that same prayer. We forgive, but dare not forget. Now, he's not saying that in a positive way, like, oh, look at us, how great, we forgive, but we dare not forget. No, he's saying like, man, we've actually gotten that wrong. We forgive, but dare not forget. And so as we look within ourselves, we are confronted with the appalling fact that the history of our lives is the history of an eternal revolt against you. But thou, O God, have mercy upon us. And I love this line. Forgive us for what we could have been, but failed to be. Isn't that awesome? Isn't that beautiful? He took the line, forgive us our debts. And then he said, forgive us for what we could have been, but failed to be. The Lord's Prayer is a model that has a structure. And so what I want us to do at this time, just like Dr. King did, I want us to practice praying through the structure of the Lord's Prayer and practice praying through this and learn how we can take this into our own private and secret time with God. And so let me briefly explain the structure, and people have broken this down in different ways. I'm going to give you one from Tim Keller that I really like. So I'm going to briefly explain it, and then we're actually all going to stand up, and we're going to go through these 4 sections of the prayer. And I've asked your other pastors to take one of the sections and to lead us through that moment. So here are the 4 sections: adoration, accepting, asking, and adhering. So adoration is the Our Father, hallowed be your name. That's that part, the adoration. And I mentioned earlier that kids are shameless, but anyone who has kids also knows that kids are naturally affectionate, right? They know how to express their love and gratitude to their parents. You could be having a terrible day, but if your child comes and just hugs you or gives you a kiss or just tells you, I love you, Daddy, oh, it could melt your heart. It changes everything, and it just connects your heart to that child. And not that God needs that, but when we are coming before God and we are worshiping him and we are adoring him and we're saying, God, you are worthy. We are ascribing value to who you are because you are good and we're grateful. That's what we're doing. Telling God that we love him and we're thankful for him. That's adoration. The second section, accepting. This is the section where we say, where Jesus taught us to pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. God has a kingdom, his reign, his rule, and God has a will, things he desires to see, and that's happening in heaven. And what we are saying is, God, we have plans. We all have plans. But God, we know that you have good plans for us. And what we're doing in that section is we're saying, God, we choose your plans over ours. We're accepting what you want over what we want. That's that section. The next section, we all know it, asking, right? We all know what that means. But here's the thing. I'm always amazed in my conversations with people as a pastor is how many people actually struggle to come before God and ask him for what they want, for what they're dealing with in their lives. It really is amazing. Many of us think that we are bothering God with our asking. Many of us think that our requests are too petty. But no. You're not bothering him. No. I used the example in the last service about the White House, right? I always love when there are children living in the White House, right? And I know that it's been a while since that's been the case, and it looks like it's going to still be a while before that's the case, but it's a whole nother discussion. But you think about one of the most powerful individuals in the world, right? There's a little child that they're the father. That's their child. If that child has a nightmare at night, you know where he's going or where she's going. She doesn't worry about bothering her father. She doesn't see him as the president. It's her father. You're not bothering God. The invitation from Jesus is that you need to be shameless and be like a child because your father loves you and he knows you. And the last part, adhering. This is the part where this is the part where we are saying to God, God, we want to be the type of people that know that we are forgiven and that in turn can forgive others. We want to receive your grace so that we can pour out your grace. But also we want to be the type of people that can resist evil and temptation. In essence, Father, we want to be more like Jesus. We want to be his adherents. We want to adhere to his lifestyle because we're following him. So those are the 4 sections: adoration, acceptance or accepting, asking, and adhering. And so at this time, I'm going to invite Seth and Jen to come up. Like I mentioned, the 4 pastors of our church, Pastor Ben, Pastor Lindsay, Seth, and myself, we're all going to take one section. And we're going to start with adoration. And I'm going to ask you to stand at this time because, again, we're going to lean into this moment. We're going to practice this. And you don't have to be a great singer like Seth to lean into adoration. In fact, I think the worse singer you are, the better. The more it touches the heart of God. I want to encourage you, if you don't have this practice, use music when you're praying. Just like we could recite a prayer back to God and really connect with it, I think worship has that ability to do it even in an even greater way. We're able to enter the throne room of God through songs that have been written that express love and gratitude. And so at this time, we're going to sing, we're going to adore God. We're going to do that first section, Our Father in Heaven, hallowed be your name. We're going to adore God. Seth is going to lead us in a song called Good, Good Father. Good, good Father. Why? Because Jesus taught us to pray, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Let's respond.
You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. Come on, declare that you're perfect. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am.
The next section is accepting. This is where Jesus teaches us to pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. This is the prayer that Jesus prayed in the garden, right? Jesus expressed to God his desires, his plan. He says, Lord, if it is possible, take this cup from me. I don't want to go through the path of the cross. If it is possible, let that pass from me. But then he added this, not my will, but your will be done. Another word that can be used besides accepting is surrendering. And so, if you will, at this time, if you would just kind of open up your palms, take out your hands, and you can close your eyes. And we're just going to say to God, God, Father, we have plans. And we'll share those plans with you. But we want to accept what you have for us. And so would you just pray this prayer with me, church? Not my will, but your will. Not our will, Father, but your will be done. Another way that I like to approach this section of the prayer is to pray your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I like to start with myself. I like to pray, Lord, your kingdom come, your will be done in my life as it is in heaven, and in my family as it is in heaven, and in our church as it is in heaven. God, would your kingdom come and your will be done in our city, in this great city of San Francisco. May your kingdom come and your will be done as it is in heaven and in the nations and in the world. Would you just pray for one moment in your own words? Feel free to add to it, but you could just say, Lord, let your kingdom come and your will be done in my life and beyond.
Asking, give us today our daily bread. I don't know about you, but it is so difficult for me to ask for things. I really do believe that God has the ability to do something about the things that I need and I want. And most of the time, I even think and believe that God wants to do something about the things that I need and I want. But if I'm being really honest, when I need to come to God asking for something, I feel like a burden. That's what keeps me. I feel like when I come to God and I need to ask for something, God's listening, and somehow this is a part of his have-to list. like the less fun requirements to be God is to listen to our asking. And so I don't know if you've ever been there. Maybe if you have, you need to hear what God has said to me over and over again. God delights in your asking. It is not a part of his have-to list. It makes God so happy to hear from you and to hear you asking for the things that you want and that you need. So I want to give you some space to do that right now. Would you go ahead and close your eyes for just a moment? And I want you to think about one thing in your life that you need right now. Just one thing. Would you hold on to that? Would you ask God for it? And be so direct to say, God, give me. God, give us. And if we could even take a step beyond that, I'm curious if there's something that you need or something that you really want, but for some reason you have not asked God for it. Can you think about that one thing? Can you picture it? You know it's been a desire, but you've been holding on to it so tightly. Listen, it's not too much. We think about the little kids. If my 7-year-old son last week on a school day before 7 a.m. could ask me for both candy and to play video games, it is not too much for you to bring this request and this desire before God. He delights in it. It makes him so happy because you are in his presence and he is hearing from you. So would you be so bold to just name that request and that desire before God right now and ask him for it?
As Jesus goes along in this model prayer, he's teaching us, he says, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. I love that in his prayer where he's teaching us how we approach God, he includes both dimensions of forgiveness. Us being forgiven by God, that we might be reconciled to God, and us having the power and ability to forgive each other, that you and I might be reconciled to one another. And when you and I hear a prayer like that, or we hear about people who've been through things like racism and they've forgiven someone, or genocide and they've forgiven their perpetrators, it's very inspiring to us. And the prayer of Jesus is incredibly inspiring, but his prayer alone isn't going to be enough to answer his prayer alone. Hebrews 9:22, telling us what had to be done, says this: in fact, the law requires that nearly everything has to be cleansed with blood. And without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. So sometimes when we are praying what we've been learning to pray today that Will's taught us, you and I will become the answer to our own prayer. But in this line, like, God, forgive me, I cannot actually become the answer to that prayer. Jesus had to offer his full life on the cross, because without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness between me and God. And so in this moment, we're going to celebrate communion, which Jesus instituted right before his death. And he held up the bread and he broke it. He said, this is my body that's been broken for you. And then he took the cup and he said, this is the blood of my new covenant, which is being poured out for you. So we've got 2 communion stations here at the front. There's one in the aisleway back. There's a lot of us in this room, but we're not in a hurry. But at this time, if you are a follower of Jesus, you may come and receive the elements, and then I'll come back in a moment and lead us through taking of those elements. You can move at this time.
Anyone besides me love the beautiful chaos of taking communion at Epic Church? We can't avoid people like at all. Well, if you'll remove that top layer and grab the wafer, again, Jesus said, this is my body which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. With that in mind, at this time you may eat. And then he took the cup and he said that this is the blood of my new covenant. It's poured out for you. And without his blood being poured out, as we mentioned, there would be no forgiveness of our sin. There would be no reconciliation. So with glad hearts, you may drink. I love that today, Will has led us to do what Jesus intended. Jesus wasn't trying to pass on information. Today is not about us learning about prayer. It's learning how to live out a praying life. And with that in mind, and Seth's going to lead us in a worship song that we love around here, but it just declares that, hey, we're in a really good place when we build our lives on Jesus and practice what he taught us to pray. So you guys lead us.